Racist teacher sets fire on black boy's braids. His mom is the school owner. A classroom incident spirals out of control when a teacher takes drastic measures against a student. The boy's mother, however, harbors a secret that will turn the tables in an unimaginable way. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning sun streamed through the classroom windows of Elite Academy as Susan Miller prepared for her art class. She arranged the supplies with mechanical precision, her movements sharp and controlled. The classroom filled with students, among them Malik Thompson, a 15-year-old whose artistic talent had already earned him recognition in local competitions. Susan watched with growing irritation as Malik pulled out his sketchbook. His latest series focused on African-American identity and resistance, themes she considered too political for a high school art class. She had already warned him twice about his choice of subjects, preferring traditional still lives and landscapes. The class began with Susan's typical rigid structure. "Today, we'll be studying classical composition," she announced, her voice carrying an edge of authority that silenced the morning chatter. While other students dutifully copied the example she provided, Malik worked on his own piece. A powerful illustration of his grandmother's hands weaving braids, each strand telling a story of heritage and survival. Susan noticed his deviation from the assignment. Her heels clicked sharply across the floor as she approached his desk. "Mr. Thompson, this is not the assignment," she said, loud enough for others to hear. The classroom fell silent. Malik looked up, his expression a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. "But Ms. Miller, I'm using the classical composition techniques you taught us. I'm just applying them to a different subject," Malik explained, his voice steady despite the tension. Several students nodded in agreement, recognizing the technical skill in his work. Susan's face tightened. Years of maintaining strict control in her classroom had left her unprepared for such challenges to her authority. The morning heat seemed to intensify as she stood over Malik's desk, her shadow falling across his artwork. Without warning, Susan reached into her pocket and pulled out a lighter, one she typically used to demonstrate wax-resist techniques. In a moment that would forever change the school's dynamics, she flicked the lighter and held the flame to Malik's carefully maintained braids. The acrid smell of burning hair filled the room. Students gasped, their shocked faces illuminated by the dancing flame. Malik jerked away, but not before several of his braids were singed. Susan's laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed through the stunned silence. "Now you have a real reason to draw about resistance," she sneered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and something deeper, perhaps fear of the changing world her students represented. Malik stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The burns weren't severe, but the humiliation burned deeper than any physical wound. Without a word, he gathered his materials and walked out of the classroom, his damaged braids a testament to the incident that would spark a movement. The news reached Veronica Thompson within minutes. As both Malik's mother and the school's owner, she had always walked a careful line between personal and professional responsibilities. But when she stormed into the building, her rage was purely maternal. She found Susan in the teacher's lounge, calmly sipping coffee as if she hadn't just assaulted a student. "What gives you the right?" Veronica's voice cut through the quiet space. Other teachers quickly excused themselves, sensing the gravity of the confrontation. Susan stood, straightening her blazer. "He needed to learn respect for authority," she said, her tone suggesting she bell. She had done nothing wrong. This constant challenge to traditional methods Traditional methods? Veronica interrupted, her voice dangerous. "You burned my son's hair. You assaulted a child in your care." The full weight of the situation seemed to finally register on Susan's face as Veronica continued. "This isn't about authority or tradition. This is about basic human dignity." The confrontation echoed through the halls, marking the beginning of a larger battle that would force the school to confront its deep-seated issues with race, power, and education. News of the incident spread through Elite Academy like wildfire. By lunchtime, every student's phone buzzed with text messages and social media posts describing how Ms. Miller had burned Malik's braids. Parents began calling the school office demanding answers. their voices rising with each retelling of the story. Veronica Thompson sat in her office, staring at the growing list of missed calls and emails. As the school's owner, she needed to address this crisis, but as Malik's mother, she wanted nothing more than to take him home and protect him from further harm. The weight of both roles pressed down on her shoulders as she drafted yet another response to a concerned parent. The emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening. As parents filed into the school auditorium, their faces reflected a mix of anger and determination. The usual polite greetings were replaced with hushed discussions about accountability and systemic change. Veronica noticed several parents filming with their phones, knowing this meeting would likely end up on social media. Clara Rodriguez, mother of a sophomore student, stood up without waiting for formal introductions. "My daughter came home crying today," she announced, her voice carrying years of suppressed frustration. Not because she was scared for herself, but because she watched her friend being humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect him. The auditorium fell silent as Clara continued. "3 years ago, my daughter was told by Ms. Miller that her Spanish accent made her sound uneducated. We complained, but nothing changed. How many incidents like this have been swept under the rug?" Other parents began sharing similar stories. A pattern emerged: subtle discrimination, dismissive attitudes toward cultural expression, and a consistent failure to address complaints. Each revelation added to the growing tension in the room. Veronica listened, her professional mask cracking with each news story. She had prided herself on running a prestigious institution, but now she wondered how much she had missed by focusing on academic excellence at the expense of cultural sensitivity. "What are you going to do about this?" demanded a father from the back row. "Will Ms. Miller face any consequences? Or will this be another incident we're supposed to forget?" The pressure to make an immediate decision weighed heavily on Veronica. The school's reputation, built over decades, hung in the balance. Firing Susan immediately might satisfy the parents' demands for justice, but it could also expose the school to legal complications. Yet keeping her employed seemed increasingly impossible. "I understand your anger," Veronica began, choosing her words carefully. "What happened today was unacceptable. I promise you a full investigation " "Investigation?" interrupted another parent. "We all know what happened. There were 30 witnesses." Veronica raised her hand for silence. "Yes, we know what happened today. But as Clara's story shows, this may be part of a larger pattern. We need to understand the full scope of the problem to ensure it never happens again." The meeting continued for hours, with parents forming committees on the spot to document past incidents and propose policy changes. What had started as outrage over a single incident was transforming into a movement for institutional change. Later that night, Veronica sat alone in her office, reviewing the meeting notes. Her phone buzzed with messages from board members concerned about potential lawsuits and negative publicity. She thought about Malik, who had spent the evening in his room, refusing to talk about what happened. The decision before her seemed impossible. As a business owner, she knew the safest path was to handle this quietly, perhaps suspend Susan with pay while things calmed down. But as a mother who had seen the burn marks on her son's hair, who had watched him struggle to maintain his composure through the humiliation, she wanted nothing less than complete justice. A text message lit up her phone. "Mom, I'm ready to talk." Veronica gathered her things, knowing that whatever Malik had to say would ultimately guide her next steps. The scandal had exposed deep wounds in her school community, and healing them would require more than just removing one problematic teacher. The art room after school became Malik's sanctuary in the weeks following the incident. While other students headed home, he stayed behind with a small group of students who had formed an unofficial art collective. Among them was James Chun, whose traditional Chinese calligraphy had once been dismissed by Susan as too ethnic for the spring art show, and Maria Santos, who had been told to paint something more American than her vibrant Mexican folk art style. Paint brushes moved across canvases as students shared their stories. Malik worked on a large piece depicting hands reaching through flames, each hand bearing different skin tones and cultural markers. The burning of his braids had become more than a personal injury. It had opened a channel for others to speak about their experiences. "My parents wanted me to keep quiet when Ms. Miller made comments about my accent," Maria said, mixing colors for her latest piece. They worried causing trouble would affect my college recommendations. She worked on a painting showing a mouth sewn shut with golden thread, breaking free from its stitches. The art room's walls slowly filled with their work. What started as personal expression evolved into a collective statement about identity and resistance. Other students began stopping by after school, first to watch, then to share their own stories, and finally to contribute their own art. Ms. Johnson, the history teacher, noticed the growing collection and suggested they organize it into a proper exhibition. "Your art is speaking truths that need to be heard," she told them, helping to secure the school gallery space for an upcoming show. Word spread about the exhibition, catching the attention of local artists and community leaders. A well-known gallery owner visited the art room and was struck by the raw honesty in the students' work. She offered to feature some pieces in her downtown gallery, bringing wider attention to their cause. Malik's mother, Veronica, watched this organic movement grow with a mixture of pride and concern. Pride in seeing her son transform his pain into something powerful. Concern about potential backlash from conservative board members who preferred to handle the incident quietly. The momentum built steadily. Students from other schools began reaching out, sharing similar experiences of discrimination and cultural suppression. What had started in the art room was becoming a broader conversation about educational justice. A local civil rights organization contacted the student group, offering support and guidance for organizing a peaceful protest. They helped the students understand their rights and the most effective ways to make their voices heard. The protest was scheduled for the following month, coinciding with the art exhibition. Students designed posters and banners, combining artistic expression with calls for change. Social media amplified their message, with hundreds of people pledging to attend. Veronica found herself at a crossroads. As school owner, she worried about the protest's impact on enrollment in donor support. But watching Malik lead meetings, organize committees, and channel his trauma into activism, she recognized something more important than institutional stability was at stake. The day before the protest, she made her decision. In a meeting with student organizers, she officially endorsed their movement. This school was founded to provide excellent education, she announced. But excellence means nothing without dignity and respect for every student's identity. Her support marked a turning point. Teachers who had remained silent began speaking up about witnessing past incidents. Staff members offered to help coordinate the protest to ensure student safety. Even some board members, seeing the strength of the community response, began advocating for systemic changes. The art room, where it all started, became protest headquarters. Students spent evenings painting banners and coordinating logistics. Their shared purpose had created something Susan's actions had tried to destroy: a stronger sense of community and cultural pride. Malik stood before his finished painting the night before the protest. The hands reaching through flames now held tools of both art and activism: brushes, pens, microphones, and signs. Above them, he had painted a phoenix rising, its feathers bearing the patterns and colors of many cultures. "Ready for tomorrow?" Veronica asked, standing beside him. Malik nodded, his regrown braids catching the light. "We all are." The morning of the protest dawned clear and cool. By 7 a.m., students began gathering outside Elite Academy's gates, carrying signs and artwork created in their after-school sessions. Local news vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the growing crowd. Malik stood with his mother at the school entrance, watching familiar faces arrive. Teachers who had remained silent about Susan's behavior now walked among the protesters, wearing buttons that read "Education Without Discrimination." Parents brought their younger children, explaining the importance of standing up against injustice. Clara Rodriguez, who had spoken out at the parent meeting, arrived with a group of Latino students from neighboring schools. They carried signs in both English and Spanish. "Our culture is not a classroom disruption, and education is a right, not a privilege." The crowd swelled to hundreds by 8 a.m. Police officers maintained a respectful distance, having been briefed about the peaceful nature of the protest. Local civil rights leaders circulated through the crowd, ensuring protesters understood the importance of remaining calm and focused on their message. When Clara stepped up to the makeshift podium, the chanting subsided. "I stand here today, not just as a parent," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "but as someone who has watched our children suffer in silence for too long." What happened to Malik was not an isolated incident. It was the match that lit years of suppressed pain. She described how her own daughter had stopped speaking Spanish at school after years of subtle discrimination. "They teach our children to be ashamed of who they are, to hide their culture, their language, their identity. Today, we say no more." The crowd responded with a thunderous applause. Students began sharing their own stories, one after another stepping up to the microphone. A Vietnamese student described being mocked for bringing traditional food to lunch. A Muslim student talked about being discouraged from wearing her hijab during school performances. As each story unfolded, the protest transformed from an expression of anger into a powerful testament to shared experiences and collective strength. News cameras captured it all, broadcasting live to local stations. Veronica watched from the school steps, feeling the weight of her upcoming speech. She had prepared careful remarks, reviewed by the board, but looking at the sea of faces, students, parents, and community members united in their demand for change, she knew she needed to speak from the heart. When she approached the microphone, a hush fell over the crowd. Everyone knew her unique position as both the school's owner and Malik's mother. The tension was palpable as they waited to hear which role would dominate her speech. "For years," she began, her voice steady, "I believed that running a prestigious school meant maintaining strict traditions. I convinced myself that excellence could only look one way, sound one way, behave one way. I was wrong." She paused, making eye contact with students she recognized in the crowd. "What happened to my son was not just an attack on his person. It was an attack on every student who has ever been made to feel that their culture, their identity, their very being was somehow less than welcome in these halls." Veronica's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Today, I stand before you not just as the owner of Elite Academy, but as a mother who has seen her child hurt by the very institution that was supposed to protect him. This ends now." She announced immediate changes: mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff, review of disciplinary policies, the establishment of a diversity and inclusion committee with real power to make changes, and a commitment to hiring teachers from diverse backgrounds. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Veronica raised her hand for silence. "These are just first steps. Real change will require ongoing commitment from all of us. Elite Academy will no longer be known just for its academic excellence, but for its commitment to dignity, respect, and true inclusion." As she stepped away from the microphone, Malik embraced her, tears streaming down both their faces. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Applause, cheers, and chants of "change starts now." The protest continued throughout the day, peaceful but powerful. Students shared poetry, performed cultural dances, and displayed their artwork. What had begun as a response to one act of cruelty had evolved into a celebration of diversity and a demand for institutional transformation. By sunset, as the crowd began to disperse, the message was clear: Elite Academy would never be the same. The protest had not just been a demonstration. It had been a declaration of a new era in the school's history. The day after the protest, Veronica called an emergency board meeting. The oak-paneled boardroom, usually reserved for budget discussions and curriculum reviews, now hosted a different kind of conversation. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs as Veronica laid out documentation of Susan's behavior. "These are signed statements from 37 students," Veronica said, sliding folders across the polished table. "Each describes incidents of discrimination, cultural insensitivity, or direct harassment from Ms. Miller. The incident with Malik wasn't isolated. It was the culmination of years of unchecked behavior." Board Chairman Richard Maxwell cleared his throat. "While what happened to your son is regrettable, we need to consider the legal implications. Ms. Miller has tenure, and hasty actions could expose us to litigation." "Litigation?" Veronica's laugh held no humor. "We're facing potential criminal charges for assault on a minor, multiple civil rights violations. The Department of Education is already investigating. Keeping Susan employed isn't protecting us. It's endangering everything this institution stands for. Other board members exchanged glances. Patricia Chun, the newest member, spoke up. The protest yesterday received national coverage. Major universities are questioning their partnership programs with us. We can't pretend this is just about one teacher anymore. Veronica projected images onto the wall screen. Social media posts, news coverage, statements from educational organizations condemning the incident. Our reputation isn't suffering because of the protest. It's suffering because we fostered an environment where a teacher felt empowered to assault a student based on his cultural identity. The board's attorney, James Wilson, reviewed the documents. These statements show a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. If this goes to court, our position would be difficult to defend. We're not here to discuss legal strategy, Veronica interrupted. We're here to decide what kind of institution we want to be. Yesterday, I promised those protesters real change. Either you support that change, or you need to step down. The tension in the room thickened. Several board members who had initially dismissed the incident as overblown now sat straighter, recognizing the gravity of the situation. What exactly are you proposing? Maxwell asked, his tone more cautious. Veronica outlined her plan. Immediate termination of Susan Miller, a complete review of all harassment complaints from the past 5 years, mandatory cultural competency training for all staff, and the establishment of a student-parent advisory committee on diversity and inclusion. The costs, one member began, are nothing compared to what we'll lose if we don't act, Veronica finished. Our students deserve better. Our community demands better. The debate continued for hours. Some board members argued for a more moderate approach, suspension rather than termination, voluntary rather than mandatory training. But as they reviewed the evidence, the weight of their responsibility became clear. Patricia Chin spoke again. My daughter attends this school. Yesterday, she asked me if I was part of the problem because I sit on this board. What message are we sending if we prioritize legal caution over moral clarity? Her words seemed to shift the atmosphere. Board members who had remained quiet began speaking up, sharing their own children's experiences and concerns. The discussion moved from whether to act to how quickly changes could be implemented. By evening, the board had reached a decision. They would support Veronica's proposals, adding additional recommendations for curriculum review and hiring practices. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive enough to move forward. As the meeting concluded, Maxwell pulled Veronica aside. You're taking a big risk, he warned. Some donors won't like these changes. Veronica gathered her materials, thinking of Malik and all the students who had shared their stories. The biggest risk, she replied, would be teaching our students that profit matters more than principle. She left the boardroom knowing that while the hard decisions had been made, the real work of transformation was just beginning. The confrontation with the board was just one battle in a longer war for institutional change. In the weeks following the protest, Malik spent every spare moment in the art studio. His latest piece dominated the room. A 6-foot canvas depicting a phoenix rising from burning braids, each feather bearing faces of students who had shared their stories of discrimination. The work combined traditional African patterns with contemporary protest imagery. Your technique has evolved, Ms. Johnson observed, watching him work on the intricate details. The art teacher had become a vital ally, keeping the studio open late and providing materials for students who couldn't afford them. You're not just painting about pain anymore. Malik stepped back from the canvas, brush still in hand. It's not just my story now, he said, gesturing to the smaller works surrounding his piece. Each student had contributed their own expression of resistance and hope. Maria's series of broken masks lay beside James's calligraphy-inspired protest banners. The upcoming exhibition, titled Unsilenced, would showcase works from over 50 students. Local galleries had offered to live-stream the opening, and several art critics planned to attend. What began as therapeutic expression had evolved into a powerful artistic movement. During unchanged periods, students gathered in the studio to work. They discussed technique and composition while sharing stories of their experiences. Even students who had never taken art classes began contributing, writing poetry to accompany the paintings, composing music for the opening, designing promotional materials. The transformation spread beyond the art studio. In English classes, students wrote essays about cultural identity. History discussions expanded to include diverse perspectives. The school's walls, once decorated with generic motivational posters, now displayed student artwork addressing social justice and cultural pride. Malik's centerpiece required 3 weeks to complete. The phoenix's wings stretched edge to edge, each feather telling a different story. He incorporated actual ashes from his burned braids into the paint, creating a textured surface that caught light in unexpected ways. Below the phoenix, hands of different colors passed flames between them, symbolizing how shared pain could fuel collective action. The night before the exhibition, students stayed late to hang the artwork. They arranged pieces to create a narrative journey, beginning with works expressing isolation and fear, progressing through anger and resistance, and culminating in hope and transformation. Malik's phoenix dominated the final wall, illuminated by carefully positioned spotlights. "This isn't just art anymore," one student remarked, stepping back to survey their work. "This is history." The exhibition opening drew hundreds of visitors. News cameras captured students leading tours, explaining the meaning behind each piece. Parents who had attended the protest wiped away tears as their children proudly discussed their contributions. Veronica stood before Malik's phoenix, studying the faces woven into its feathers. Each one represented a story that might have remained untold if not for that moment of violence that sparked their movement. "Sometimes," she said to no one in particular, "transformation comes from the most painful places." Art critics praised the exhibition's raw honesty and technical skill. One reviewer wrote, "These young artists have transformed personal trauma into universal truth." Their work speaks not just to their school community, but to anyone who has ever felt silenced or diminished. The exhibition's success led to unexpected opportunities. Several students, including Malik, received offers from summer art programs. Galleries in neighboring cities requested to host the show. Educational organizations asked to use images of the artwork in cultural sensitivity training materials. More importantly, the art sparked ongoing conversations within the school community. Students who had never spoken about their experiences found their voice through creative expression. Teachers began incorporating discussions of identity and discrimination into their lessons. As the exhibition closed its initial run, Malik added one final detail to his phoenix: a small mirror embedded in its heart, allowing viewers to see themselves reflected in the work. "Everyone who looks at this is part of the story now," he explained to visitors. "We all have the power to rise from the ashes of discrimination and create something beautiful." The studio remained open late into the evening as students began work on new pieces. The movement that began with a single act of cruelty had evolved into a sustained artistic dialogue about identity, resistance, and transformation. Through their art, they have found not just their voices, but their power to create lasting change. Susan Miller sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by newspapers covering the protest. Her phone had been silent for days. Colleagues who once supported her traditional teaching methods now avoided contact. Social media buzzed with calls for her termination, her name becoming synonymous with educational discrimination. She drafted another email to the board, attempting to justify her actions. "Maintaining classroom discipline," she typed, then deleted it. Each explanation sounded hollow now. The security footage of the incident, leaked online, showed her laughing as she held the flame to Malik's hair. She barely recognized herself in that video. Across town, Veronica paced her home office. Financial reports showed several major donors threatening to withdraw support. The school's endowment could take a significant hit if she proceeded with the planned changes. Conservative board members warned that extensive diversity programs might drive away traditional families. "Mom," Malik stood in the doorway. "Are you okay?" Veronica quickly minimized the spreadsheet showing the projected losses. "Just working late." "I heard about the donors," Malik said. "Some kids at school said their parents are talking about transferring them out." He hesitated. "Maybe we should slow down with the changes." Veronica studied her son. The way he stood straighter now, his regrown braids a symbol of resilience. "Are you saying that because you believe it, or because you're worried about me?" Meanwhile, alumni began taking sides. Social media erupted with debates between graduates who defended the school's traditional approach and those sharing their own experiences of discrimination. Some prominent alumni threatened to distance themselves from the school, while others pledged new support specifically for diversity initiatives. The Teachers' Lounge became a battleground of whispered conversations. Older faculty members worried about changes to their teaching methods, while younger teachers pushed for immediate reforms. Several teachers who had witnessed Susan's past behavior without reporting it now struggled with their complicity. One evening, Susan drove past the school, seeing lights on in the art studio. Through the windows, she watched students working on their exhibition pieces. The sight of their collaborative energy, their freedom of expression, contrasted sharply with her rigid control of her own classroom. For the first time, she began to question not just that one violent act, but her entire approach to education. Veronica received an unexpected visit from her father, a former elite academy board member. "You're dismantling everything we built," he argued. "Excellence requires discipline, structure. Excellence requires dignity," Veronica countered. "What good is academic achievement if it comes at the cost of a student's identity?" The conflict spread beyond school grounds. Local parents' groups debated whether elite academies' transformation would set a precedent for other schools. Some praised the changes as long overdue, while others warned of declining academic standards. Support staff found themselves caught in the middle. The school's secretary fielded angry calls from both sides. The maintenance crew worked overtime, removing inflammatory graffiti from school walls. Even the cafeteria workers noticed tension as students self-segregated during lunch periods. Late one night, Veronica found Malik in the art studio, adding details to his Phoenix painting. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing," she admitted. "Every decision affects so many people." Malik mixed colors on his palette. "Remember what you told me when I was little? About why you bought this school?" Veronica smiled. "I said I wanted to create a place where every student could become their best self. Not just the ones who fit someone else's idea of excellence," Malik added, applying a bold stroke to his canvas. The conversation sparked something in Veronica. The next morning, she called an all-staff meeting. Instead of defending her decisions, she invited honest dialogue about fears and hopes for the school's future. The discussion lasted hours, revealing deep divisions but also unexpected common ground. As news of elite academies' internal struggles spread, other schools began examining their own policies. The local education board scheduled hearings on cultural sensitivity in private schools. What started as an internal conflict was catalyzing broader conversations about institutional change. The school auditorium filled to capacity for the all-school Assembly on Diversity and Inclusion. Students, parents, teachers, and community leaders packed the seats. News cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in the dimmed space. The stage displayed artwork from the student exhibition, with Malik's Phoenix as the centerpiece. Below it, chairs arranged in a semicircle seated representatives from various student groups, parent committees, and educational organizations. Principal Martinez opened the assembly. 6 months ago, an act of violence in our halls forced us to confront uncomfortable truths. Today, we gather not to dwell on that moment, but to ensure it never happens again. The program began with student performances. The Multicultural Club presented traditional dances. The Poetry Club performed spoken word pieces about identity and belonging. Each presentation received standing ovations, the audience recognizing the courage behind every performance. When Malik took the stage, the room fell silent. He stood before his Phoenix painting, his braids now fully regrown. "Before that day in our class, I thought success meant fitting in," he began. "I tried to make my art less ethnic, my voice less disruptive. I dimmed my light to make others comfortable." He gestured to the Phoenix. "But sometimes it takes a fire to show us our true strength. This isn't just my story anymore. Look at the faces in these feathers. Every student who found their voice, every parent who demanded change, every teacher who chose to stand with us." Veronica's speech followed. She announced concrete changes: new hiring policies prioritizing diverse faculty, curriculum updates incorporating multicultural perspectives, mandatory cultural competency training, and the establishment of a permanent student-parent diversity council with real decision-making power. Excellence doesn't look one way, she declared. It doesn't speak one language or come from one culture. True excellence embraces every voice, every story, every identity that walks through our doors. The Assembly's most powerful moment came during the open forum. Students lined up at microphones to share their experiences and hopes for the school's future. Their stories range from painful accounts of past discrimination to ambitious visions of inclusive education. Maria Santos, speaking in both Spanish and English, described how the movement had transformed her relationship with her heritage. "I used to hide my language, my culture. Now I understand that my diversity makes this school stronger." James Chen shared how his grandmother, a Chinese calligraphy master, would now be teaching workshops at the school. "Art isn't just about technique," he said. "It's about preserving and celebrating our cultural traditions." The Assembly concluded with the unveiling of new school policies, each developed through collaboration between administration, students, and parents. The changes went beyond superficial diversity initiatives, addressing systemic issues in disciplinary procedures, curriculum development, and student support services. As attendees filed out, many stopped to sign a massive canvas stretched across the lobby. "Our commitment to change," the banner read, collecting hundreds of signatures from community members pledging to uphold the new principles of inclusion and respect. Local media coverage highlighted the Assembly as a model for institutional transformation. Educational consultants requested permission to document Elite Academy's process as a case study in school reform. What began as a response to tragedy had evolved into a blueprint for change. That evening, Veronica found Malik adding final touches to a new painting in the studio. This one showed the school building with windows revealing diverse scenes of learning, creativity, and community within. "Think we really changed things?" he asked, not looking up from his work. Veronica watched him paint, remembering the frightened boy who walked out of class months ago, and seeing now a leader who helped transform an institution. "We didn't just change things," she replied. "We changed people. That's what lasts." Veronica sat in her office reviewing dusty personnel files retrieved from the school archives. Each folder revealed a pattern she had missed. Formal complaints against Susan Miller dating back years, all carefully minimized or dismissed by previous administrators. 2018. A Korean student complained about Susan mocking her accent during class presentations. 2019. 3 Black students reported being told their art was too urban for the school gallery. 2020. A Muslim student's parents protested after Susan demanded she remove her hijab for a school performance. Each incident had been handled quietly, with Susan receiving nominal reprimands. Parents were placated with promises of change that never materialized. Some families had withdrawn their children, their departure letters citing personal reasons that now read like coded references to discrimination. Determined to uncover the full scope, Veronica established a confidential reporting system for current and former students. The responses flooded in immediately. Alumni from decades past shared stories they had never told, their collective testimony painting a picture of systematic suppression of cultural expression. "We need to document everything," Veronica told her legal team. "Every incident, every complaint, every administrative response." The investigation expanded beyond Susan. Other teachers' files revealed similar patterns, though less severe. The school's hiring practices showed a clear bias toward traditional candidates, with qualified diverse applicants routinely passed over. Former administrators had maintained what they called cultural harmony by pressuring minority students to assimilate. School policies subtly discouraged cultural expressions, from dress codes that banned traditional hairstyles to curriculum choices that excluded diverse perspectives. Clara Rodriguez organized a meeting of affected families. In the school library, parents shared stories of how their children had been impacted. Some students had abandoned cultural practices to fit in. Others struggled with identity and self-worth years after graduation. "We're not just seeking justice for one incident," Clara declared. "We're exposing decades of institutional bias." Veronica prepared a comprehensive report for the board. The evidence was undeniable. Susan's attack on Malik wasn't an isolated incident of cruelty, but the culmination of a culture that had long suppressed diversity. The night before the final board meeting, Veronica found an email from Susan herself. "I've read the testimonies," Susan wrote. "For the first time, I see what I was part of, what I became. No apology can erase the harm, but perhaps my story can serve as a warning to others." At the board meeting, Veronica presented her findings. The room fell silent as she displayed yearbook photos showing the gradual whitewashing of student expression over decades. Cultural celebrations disappeared from school calendars. Art shows became increasingly homogeneous. "We're not just deciding the fate of one teacher," Veronica concluded. "We're deciding whether to acknowledge and correct decades of systemic discrimination." The board members, confronted with overwhelming evidence, could no longer hide behind bureaucratic caution. The vote for Susan's termination was unanimous. More importantly, they approved a complete review of school policies and practices. As word spread about elite academies reckoning with its past, other private schools began facing similar scrutiny. The revelation sparked a regional conversation about institutional racism in education, with elite academies investigating serving as a model for other schools. The findings became part of the school's curriculum, with students studying their own institution's history as a case study in systemic discrimination and institutional change. The painful past became a tool for teaching future generations about vigilance against bias. The final board meeting took place on a Friday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows as board members reviewed the evidence against Susan Miller. Security footage, student testimonies, and decades of documented complaints lay before them in neat folders. "The vote must be unanimous," Veronica stated. "We're not just terminating an employee. We're declaring our values as an institution." One by one, board members cast their votes. Even those who had initially resisted change now recognized the necessity of decisive action. Susan Miller's termination was approved without a single dissenting voice. Within hours, the decision rippled through the school community. Students gathered in the art studio where Malik worked on his final piece, a mural depicting the school's transformation. The phoenix motif remained, but now it carried symbols of victory and renewal rather than pain. Elite Academy's transformation attracted national attention. Educational journals published case studies on institutional reform. Other private schools sought guidance on implementing similar changes. What began as a crisis became a model for positive change. Malik received his acceptance letter to the prestigious National Arts Academy, along with a full scholarship. His portfolio, centered on themes of resistance and transformation, had impressed the admissions committee. The letter specifically mentioned how his work sparked important conversations about culture and identity in education. Veronica implemented the promised changes. The school hired its most diverse faculty cohort in history. New curriculum guidelines emphasized multicultural perspectives. The Student Parent Diversity Council gained real authority in school governance. 1 year after the incident, Elite Academy hosted an anniversary event. The art studio, where everything began, was renamed the Phoenix Studio. Student artwork lined every corridor, each piece telling a story of cultural pride and resistance. During the ceremony, Veronica announced a new scholarship fund named after Malik, dedicated to supporting artists from marginalized communities. The fund, backed by alumni donations, would ensure that Elite Academy remained accessible to talented students regardless of background. Clara Rodriguez joined the Board of Trustees, bringing her advocacy experience to the school's leadership. Her first initiative established mandatory cultural competency training for all staff members, from teachers to maintenance personnel. The final surprise came from Susan Miller herself. Through her lawyer, she delivered a letter to be read at the ceremony. "My actions reflected deep-seated prejudices I hadn't confronted," she wrote. "While I cannot undo the harm I've caused, I hope my story serves as a warning about the cost of intolerance in education." Malik's graduation ceremony marked both an ending and a beginning. His valedictorian speech touched on themes of transformation and justice. "We didn't just change a school," he declared. "We changed what's possible in education." As summer approached, New students toured Elite Academy. They saw Malik's Phoenix mural, read the plaques describing the school's transformation, and understood they were entering an institution that had faced its failures and emerged stronger. Veronica watched these tours from her office window. The school she'd inherited had been built on tradition and exclusion. The one she would pass on stood for justice and inclusion. In the end, what began with an act of cruelty had sparked a revolution in educational equity. Elite Academy's story became required reading in education programs nationwide. Its transforma tie-in proved that institutional change, while painful, was possible when a community united behind principles of justice and dignity. The final changes to school policy ensured that the transformation would outlast its catalyzing moment. Future generations of students would inherit not just a reformed institution, but a living example of how to turn tragedy into triumph.